Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. It is Nonfiction November. I know that Olive is no longer hosting this lovely readathon, but there are plenty of people who are still keeping the tradition alive, and I am one of them. Are you? If you are at all intimidated by nonfiction, I would definitely recommend you start with either memoirs or narrative nonfiction. I have a great recommendation list for memoirs that are narrated by their authors, which I will link here if that's the route you decide to go. But today I'm going to be talking about some of my absolute favorite narrative nonfiction books that are just as compelling as fiction reads. So if you've been on my channel for really any length of time, you have probably heard me yammer on a ton about shipwreck and survival stories. It's a weird niche category that I absolutely find fascinating. I could fill up a whole video on those, and in fact, I have already done that. I will link that if you are interested in more shipwreck stories. But to keep this video from being too long, I am going to only talk about two. The one that got me started, and my absolute favorite. The one that started it all for me was Dead Wake, The Last Crossing of the Lusitania, which was written by Erik Larson. So in 1915, a luxury liner left New York City headed towards Liverpool. Sure, there was a war, but the captain thought that he could outrun any warship, and therefore there was no threat to his passengers. What he didn't account for was German U-boats. The Lusitania was struck and sank astonishingly quickly. Erik Larson did such meticulous research, finding out what those passengers were eating, what items actually survived, how this boat sank this fast, and within sight of land. He really had a knack for setting the scene and using a bunch of different historical records to back up and make this story as factual as possible. Before this, I had no idea how propulsive nonfiction could be. He is immensely talented, and I have another one of his books, The Devil in the White City, which I have not read yet, but I'm very excited to get to. If you've read this, share your thoughts on it with me. So my absolute favorite shipwreck and survival story is Endurance, Shackleton's incredible voyage, written by Alfred Lansing. Yes, this book came out in 1959, and yes, this cover is ugly. But do not judge a book by its cover. This is one of the most riveting survival stories I have ever read. Honestly, it is so pacey and well plotted out. It's almost implausible, but sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. So in 1914, Shackleton set out to explore Antarctica with a crew of 27 people. And once they got down there, the ice overcame their boat and sank it. Then the rest of the story is what they do next. I am not going to say anything more because I love the way that this story unravels, and I don't want to take that from you. I would also recommend the audiobook because Simon Preble does an excellent job. And if you're like me and unfamiliar with boat terms that don't sound like the way they're written, he will pronounce them in the way that they are supposed to be pronounced. Vauxhall instead of this word. How was I supposed to know that? Okay, switching from water to fire, a fire disaster book I just recently finished was Fire Weather, a true story from a hotter world by John Valliant. This details the 2016 wildfire in the Alberta oil sands, which was the costliest wildfire in Canadian history. Wildfires keep getting more and more extreme due to climate change. I found it astounding that the amount of energy generated by this wildfire could have powered multiple nuclear bombs. Blew my mind. Firefighters had to change their strategies because at these extreme temperatures, water was essentially useless. It just evaporated and did nothing. It is a riveting story, but it is also a human one. We see people lose all of their stuff just in a matter of hours. And it really proves how destructive climate change can really be. And we really stand to gain a lot if we can start mitigating this. There was a quote from an former oil exec that I wanted to share with you. Maybe it wasn't as profitable as we thought it was because we haven't paid the bill. Too true. Our climate is changing at breakneck speeds to the point that we are seeing things in a single human lifespan that would have taken hundreds of years. This was excellent. There are lots of photos in the center, but I don't want to spoil anything. So just know that you can get some pictures if you pick this one. Speaking of element disasters, let's switch to snow. If you saw my first vlog of this year, I was influenced to pick up Into Thin Air by Audrey over at Audrey Approved. She loves Jon Krakauer and has some great nonfiction recommendations. So if you want even more, you should check her out. This is all about Jon Krakauer. He is a journalist and is assigned a piece to write about the guides to help people hike Mount Everest. Since he was already a mountain climber, he decides to go full method acting and decides to hire this guide and to hike Mount Everest for his article. Now, because he is writing this book, we know he is going to come out at least alive. But his trip ended disastrously. Going into it, I knew that there were going to be people who died, but I didn't really know the details of the story. And quite honestly, it had me on tenterhooks the whole last half of the book. I didn't want to put this down. This writing was extremely visceral. I felt like I could feel the cold and the snow and the brain fog, the brain fog from the lack of oxygen, being at high elevations. And yes, this was excellent, and I can't wait to pick up more of his work. Okay, so the elements theme isn't going to work anymore, and that's fine. So we are switching to a space disaster, and I'd love to recommend Challenger by Adam Higginbotham. Challenger is about the 1986 space shuttle explosion that killed 7 people, including a teacher, Krista McAuliffe. Because there was a teacher on board, many school children were watching the launch on TVs around the country and were able to witness firsthand the rocket exploding, which killed all 7 astronauts. The author is incredibly thorough, writing this intricate backstory about the very beginning of NASA and how they got to the space shuttle program and how the disaster happened. And it can be a little bit frustrating because this disaster did not have to happen. It was needless. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on that book, Challenger, I will link my video for that. I do not read a lot of true crime, but I had to make an exception for one of the OG narrative nonfiction books, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This follows the murder of the Clutter family in Kansas back in the 60s. A mom, dad, and 2 kids were all murdered. Truman Capote goes through the scenes. He interviews the townspeople. He interviews the perps. And you get this really interesting story of how this murder unfolded. If there had been podcasts back in 1966, this definitely would have been one. I do like that this murder is solved. I do like that there is a satisfying ending. Another true crime that was also an exception was All Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. She details her and some other people who were kind of working on this cold case. And while it was not solved by the end of the book, it has now been solved. And so you can always go online and get down a rabbit hole if you want to know. For me, I don't like unsolved mysteries. I like to have a satisfying ending. What about you? Does that bother you? Am I weird? I have 2 books to recommend on poverty, specifically in the United States. The first is Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This won the Pulitzer Prize for Nonfiction back in 2016 and is absolutely 5 stars, so amazing. I suppose it is partially out of date, but as the housing situation in the United States has not really gotten any better, I think that there's still quite a lot of value to be had. So he follows people and families for several years, documenting basically all of the consequences of being evicted. He said that, back in the day, communities and neighbors, they knew each other, and they would stand together against these landlords to try and keep people in their homes. Poverty is this never-ending cycle, and it is incredibly hard to break out. He shows with cold, hard facts just how much hurt and trauma poverty inflicts, how it's not really possible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He also includes ways that we could better our social safety nets. Poverty is not a moral failure. It is a policy failure. And I'd like to share a quote that I thought really summed up the book. Whatever our way out of this mess, one thing is certain. This degree of inequality, this withdrawal of opportunity, this cold denial of basic needs, this endorsement of pointless suffering, by no American value is this situation justified. No moral code or ethical principle, no piece of scripture or holy teaching can be summoned to defend what we have allowed our country to become. Those words are truer now than ever before. The other amazing poverty book that I read was called Broke in America by Joanne Goldblum and Colleen Shaddox. This had quite a bit more of an in-depth look at different elements of poverty. And while I knew that there were a large amount of people who are food insecure, they don't know where their next meal is coming, they don't know if they're going to eat, I didn't know about diaper insecurity. 1 in 3 moms do not have diapers for their children. And daycares require that you provide diapers. And if you don't, they won't allow your kid to be there, which means parents miss work. It has a disastrous cascade effect, and people can lose their jobs and become even further entrenched in poverty. One of the authors was particularly moved by the need for diapers, and so she started her very first diaper bank network to help moms have enough diapers for their kids. Honestly, these stories are really important to help generate empathy because that seems to be in short supply these days. It showed the various struggles that people have and also included actionable steps for ways that people individually and as voters can help. With the state of our failing social networks, this book is very, very timely. Lastly, I'm going to talk about 2 science-y type books. The first is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker, and this follows the Galvin family who had 12 children. 6 of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and 2 others were diagnosed with other mental illness. They pioneered a lot of the early science on schizophrenia and helped scientists determine that there definitely is a genetic component with schizophrenia. They also laid a lot of the groundwork for early meds. This family was utterly fascinating. However, please check the trigger warnings before you read this book because it has a lot of upsetting content. Like a lot. But I definitely found this book as propulsive as a fiction read. The last one I will mention is The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Blum. This is a narrative nonfiction about kind of the beginning of forensic science. We follow Charles Norris and Alexander Geller as they are coming up with ways to see if people have been poisoned. And while there isn't one overarching narrative, there are lots of like mini stories about a specific poison and a crime case where someone was convicted of poisoning someone with that type of poison. I found it really, really fascinating. I've even picked up a couple more poison books. Maybe it's my new niche category that I'm excited about, but I definitely get some side eye from my husband when I pick up poison books. But if you have any you want to recommend, I love them and I definitely want to read more. Okay, so those are some of my favorite narrative nonfiction books. I really hope that you have found something that you would like to read. They have so much to offer. And if you can find this like a niche category that you are just really interested in, it can be so fun. They don't always have to be depressing, although I do realize that almost all of the ones I picked were. I am going to insert a pile of possibilities for my current nonfiction November. I don't really do TBRs anymore because I'm definitely a mood reader, but I am definitely going to get to King of Kings which is about the Iranian Revolution. And I will be buddy reading that with Hannah from Savage Reads. I'll link her in case you want to check her out. She also reads a lot of nonfiction. And let me know if there's anything in my stack that you would like me to prioritize. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy reading!